Minister hiding under his desk. We're still astonished that it's now been weeks since the U.S. President said he would maybe jokingly that Canada would be the 51st state. It's incredible the Prime Minister of Canada has not responded to that, which is an illustration of the absolute, total, pathetic weakness of Justin Trudeau and his entire chaotic government. The only way for me to have the moral authority to get a deal with incoming President Trump is to have the strength that comes from winning election and having a 4-year mandate so that I face him with a position of strength.
You said this week in a radio interview that prorogation in this scenario would be against the rules. Do you think that's the likely scenario? And if so, how would that compare to what Stephen Harper did in 2008 when he was facing a non-confidence vote and prorogued Parliament, which was quite controversial at the time?
Well, the difference is that in the Harper era, he prorogued to stop an undemocratic coalition from taking over against the will of the people. In this case, a prorogation would be to preserve an undemocratic coalition that has lost the confidence of both the House and of Canadians. If Jagmeet Singh this time is telling the truth, which remains to be seen, then he will join with me and write the Governor General. So in fact, I'm giving my letter not only to the Governor General, but I'm giving it to the leaders of the NDP and Bloc, and I'm encouraging them to write the Governor General as well, if they're serious about a non-confidence vote, to recall Parliament. I'll answer your questions. To recall Parliament and vote on whether we call a carbon tax election. Now, Mr. Singh, you know, he right now, you've all once again been duped and reported without any criticism of what he's done. He's talking about holding a non-confidence vote in March. So we're going to have months and months and months of this total chaos if Jagmeet Singh gets his way. And it conveniently will get him his pension. So the whole 41 million Canadians are being held hostage by the pension of one man. So I'm asking Mr. Singh to put patriotism ahead of pension, sign a letter to the Governor General confirming in writing what he said in front of the cameras, that is, that he no longer has got confidence in this Prime Minister and that he is ready to go to an axe the tax election.
Is it possible to go to an election before Inauguration Day, or would you like to see it? How can you just like lay out?
The sooner the better. I mean, it's irresponsible for us not to go to an election. The absolute mayhem, if I could answer your question, every minute that this chaotic clown show goes on is irresponsible for Canada. The only way to put Canada first is to immediately elect a new Prime Minister who has the strength and smarts, the brains and backbone to put Canada first.
Last question. With the Democratic precedent of having the Governor General not only bring the House back, but set the agenda for that House of Commons, would you tolerate that as Prime Minister in the future?
Well, I wouldn't tolerate anything that's going on right now. I think it's total mayhem. I've never seen anything like it. It's hallucinogenic to imagine that the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister would resign the day she was supposed to introduce her fall budget. A budget that, by the way, we forget, is 55% bigger deficit than they promised. $62 billion in new inflation. And the Prime Minister has lost the confidence of 60 of his own MPs, and somehow he's clinging to power. We have a guy here who has lost control of everything, and yet he clings to power. This cannot go on. So what I'm proposing is the most democratic thing that can happen. Let's have a vote in the House to let Canadians have a vote at the ballot box to elect a new common sense government that will put Canada first. Thank you very much. That is costing Canadians after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government.
That it just wasn't tenable. It hasn't really been tenable for quite some time. It's just that because this is not a situation where the caucus doesn't like the leader, doesn't like the agenda, doesn't like the record, and personally dislikes the guy and wants him gone. This is a question where the political fortunes of the party turn so sour for their own sake and for the party's sake, they felt they had no choice. So there were meetings on December 23rd between the caucus leadership. They met again on Friday to map things out. The Liberal executives were meeting over the weekend. The MPs who were kind of behind that initial letter writing effort, they met over the weekend through Zoom to discuss the options that if they get to the caucus meeting on Wednesday and there's still no answer from the Prime Minister, what steps do they take? So there have been wheels within wheels moving inside the Liberal Party, giving him the Christmas break to figure out what he wanted to do, while they were also planning, caucus members and caucuses and sort of the rebellious wing of the caucus of what they would do. And but here we are on January 6th. The Prime Minister born on Christmas Day is announcing his departure on Old Christmas Day. All of that happening in a little under an hour from outside Rideau Cottage.
I will say I also had some contact with MPs over the weekend, and I did notice, David, sort of a marked change in tone from before Christmas. Before Christmas, the frustration, certainly, but they were willing to give him some time to consider things and let him have the break with his family. The fact that they had still not heard anything on Friday when the Prime Minister did make a public appearance to sign the condolences book for Jimmy Carter at the U.S. Embassy, went to a cabinet committee on U.S.-Canada relations, which is normal. He's still the Prime Minister. But I think that upset some of them, that he also didn't have anything to say to them or to Canadians. They expressed to me frustration that they were kept in the dark. And for the first time, I also heard from some of them some anger, some real anger with the way that he had handled this decision. So it didn't seem as though there was any way to get those people back on side. But I continue to think that there probably was a way to get some of those people back on side 6 months ago. And we've talked about this now for six months, maybe 8 months. All the moments where there was a warning shot sent to the Prime Minister about his leadership, and there was no response, or the response was not enough, or it came back like an echo chamber. And that continued and I think that's important to remind Canadians, because part of the reason we are here today is because of that, of the fact that the response and the reaction was not adequate or didn't happen at all.
Yeah, there is a remarkable, I don't know if irony is the right word, Rosemary, that a Prime Minister's office that has been criticized by its caucus for not listening, over-deliberating, moving too slow, and the actions that were taken were not significant enough. Here we are now, right? That maybe it took too long to get to this point, even if it is the action that the caucus wanted. There are real questions now about the runway available to the party to pick a new leader and see who that is, have them build a team, fundraise for a leadership, and then turn around and fundraise for an election and then be ready for an election. I mean, there's not a lot of time, especially with those confidence votes that are there. But I would agree with your assessment that a lot of frustration had turned to anger, and that if he had gone to this National Caucus meeting that is scheduled for Wednesday, an extraordinary caucus meeting supposed to go 6 hours. Not sure how this affects that now. If he went to that without an answer, or said he needed more time, or said he was staying, it was going to escalate. I spent my Christmas holidays back in St. John's talking on the phone when I was supposed to be visiting friends and family. And, MPs were flat out saying if they're going to try to rag the puck, and drag this out and buy more time, they can't afford to let it happen. And these are people who want to run again and want to have a political future with the Liberal Party of Canada, that maybe they resurrect the idea of the letter, put the names on it, try to get it to 80 names and make it all go public. There were some MPs who suggested if we come back and he isn't going, I'm not sitting in that caucus, that they would go sit as independents. Now, I don't know if that's just bluster, a threat that they would actually have to follow through on, but certainly, if all of the information we have is correct, and since we've reported that the Prime Minister will announce today he's leaving as Liberal leader and as Prime Minister, no one has called to say retract the story and you're wrong. They won't have to follow through on those. So I think there's a lot of relief inside the Liberal caucus right now. Some joy for people who have been pushing for this, but there's a lot of people who are just sad that it had to come to this, that they had hoped that the PM and the people around them would have come to this decision much earlier in the process, made the changes they needed to make, including the change at the very top, and things wouldn't have had to have gotten so ugly and so public as they did. But that's politics. It's not fair, and it's where we are today.
Yeah, it's a fairly brutal profession, and this is the way things end. Just ask Chrystia Freeland. She would also have that assessment of things. So let's talk a little bit about, David, what we know about the leadership process and how that might unfold. We can talk about some names in a minute, but in terms of the timelines of things, because I think it would be hard for them to do an extended leadership race, 4 months, for instance. I think that would be hard to explain to Canadians, given that they've sort of ended up in this mess because of themselves, for their own doing, right? So you have to kind of justify it to Canadians in a way that makes sense, especially if you're going to choose prorogation.
Yeah, there's multiple constituencies they've got to appeal to here, right? There's a broader Canadian electorate, and then there are the Liberal supporters, and then there are the leadership candidates themselves in the camps. And there needs to be a process, both parliamentary and politically, that looks legitimate, or as legitimate as possible, to everyone involved. And for those of you who didn't spend your Christmas holidays reading the Liberal Party of Canada Constitution, in terms of a leadership, it basically says once the Prime Minister or once the party leader gives notice that they're leaving, the National Executive must meet within 27 days to establish a timeline for a leadership race. And then candidates will have to submit sort of their papers or documentation to seek the leadership. 90 days is the cutoff prior to the vote. So if you go just with a 90-day race and that window of 27 days, which presumably you can shorten that one because the executive can meet pretty quickly, you're looking at 117 days. You're looking at 4 months, essentially. That's not tenable. Now, I'll explain that in a second. The Liberals can shorten that if with a 75% vote of the Liberal National Executive. So they have to meet, come up with a supermajority consensus of 75% to vote to change those timelines and justify what they're doing.
But there's a path there. There's a path to make it shorter.
There is an option there. You're right. And the reason why 4 months isn't tenable is a bunch of things. Even if you prorogue, they've got to pass what's known as interim supply before the end of March. This is essentially money supply that allows the government to keep paying its bills, paying its salaries, and functioning as normal until the budget is passed, which is usually something that happens in June. If they don't prorogue, well, there's non-confidence votes coming at them left, right, and center. This public accounts one that people are talking about, I don't think that is a big deal.
No.
It's a symbolic move, but if it comes from a committee as a report, there's precedent on this from the 2005 Martin minority government that while it could be a vote expressing non-confidence, it would technically be what's known as a concurrence motion from a committee report, and while it would send a message, it wouldn't have the weight and force and effect of bringing down the government, at least not as I understand it. So you have the political timelines, the party timelines, colliding with the parliamentary timelines, Rosie, and overlaying all of it is the political reality of the moment.
Yes.
And the Liberal Party of Canada and the Government of Canada have to navigate a way through this to figure out how they get from today, when the Prime Minister will make it official that he's leaving as leader and leaving as Prime Minister, to the point in time where whoever replaces Justin Trudeau is picked. And how does the government function in between? How does Parliament work in between? And how do you deal with Donald Trump in between? There's a lot of things happening all at the same time on multiple paths. And this announcement coming up in a half an hour or so just further complicates it while also clarifying.